YouTube, welcome to my YouTube channel, Anna Bella, and today I am going to be reviewing Netflix's new version of Persuasion. It is based on Jane Austen's last novel, which came out the 20th of December 1870, and is set in the Regency era, and the Regency era was from 1811 to 1820, and it was when George III unfortunately had gone mad again. Yes, this was his second illness slash mental illness slash, we now know that it was a physical illness, but that's beside the point. And his son, the Prince of Wales, the Prince Regent, had to run a regency. It is also her most mature work. And it's interesting that Netflix's version of Persuasion is based on her novel. It is not a carbon copy of it, which is interesting. Some good points. Casting, excellent. The use of the titles of when they're visiting different houses before you get there, like High Cross or Low Cross, etc., etc. Very good, so you know exactly where you are. The scenery and landscaping, loving it. Cinematography, 5 stars, brilliant. This is where it's going to start to fall down. Anne Elliot is the most mature of Jane Austen's heroines in her 6 completed novels. Sanditon is not a completed novel. Just so that you're aware. And Anne Elliot is in her late 20s. She got persuaded by her rather snobby family not to accept the marriage to Captain Wentworth because he wasn't rich enough to maintain her, and they did have a point. But what Netflix have done is they've turned Persuasion, which is a serious, mature novel about snobbery and class and high society and the aristocracy and wanting a title and vanity and all of these things. They've turned it into an Emma-esque comedy, and Emma is a great novel in its own right. Heroine is Emma, who often breaks the fourth wall and talks to the reader slash the viewer. Anne Elliot does not. Anne Elliot is shy and serious. In this, they have her talking to the audience, which I think could have worked had they actually done it in a way that wasn't comic. There are also diversity issues with what they've done to Persuasion. Yes, they've tried to diversify it, which is an admirable thing to do. But when you understand that that might actually be quite a bad thing to do, because most of the people that Jane Austen is writing about are white slave owners. We know that Bingley has got mills in the north, that's where his fortune comes from, and those mills would usually work with cotton. So they'd employ children, indentured UK-based children, would work this cotton into cloth in textile mills. This cotton came over from the slave plantations in, obviously, the United States of America and the Caribbean and anywhere else that was growing cotton, usually on a slave plantation. So all of the people that Jane Austen is talking about, particularly in Mansfield Park, own slaves. So to try and put black people, British black people, into that scenario is incredibly awkward. It's one of the reasons why I haven't gone the Bridgerton route. Yes, Queen Charlotte probably was or may have had distant African royalty within her background. It's very likely that she did. But to change the narrative so entirely is wrong, because actually you are putting people that would have been slaves in this era, or at least a footman. And in fact, British people did have slaves, particularly upper class people did have slaves to serve them and wait them at table during this period. And I just think that's wrong to sort of change it around. And I know Henry VIII had a black trumpeter who was able to say, Henry, you're not paying me enough, can I have some more money, please? And Henry said, yeah, that's fine. So there were exceptions, but it's unlikely. And where you try and force something, particularly regarding a white woman's work, of her criticism of the burgeoning development of the middle class and the snobbery of those within the middle class, because we don't like people who are trade, no. Yet we will. A gentleman didn't work, he didn't have a profession. If you had 3 sons, your eldest son would inherit the estate, so would be busy running that, or at least employing people to run that for him. with an estate manager, but he would have overall say. Your second son would obviously join the church, so they would go into a parish on your land, on your estate, and your third son would go into either the army or the navy. And this is where we're at. So we're dealing with the burgeoning effect of all these officers in the navy in Persuasion, because Persuasion is about Royal Navy people who were seen at this particular time as not as posh as the people in the military, because the army had been around longer. The navy was sort of like, we're not quite sure how this is going to work type thing, particularly with officers. And Jane Austen is actually writing about the very annoying thing of social class. So she's writing about people who are in genteel poverty, think Little Women poverty, genteel poverty, who are climbing up, if that makes sense, or face coming down, particularly if you're a woman. So it's a very precarious situation, because you're basically dealing with the upper middle class fretting about who's going to go up and who's going to go down. And there are 4 strands to social class. There is your inherited cultural, your inherited capital or privilege, which is what you're born with, and that should stay the same throughout your life. But there are 3 other effects that can affect that. There's obviously your economic capital, which is what Anne Elliot's family are facing. The reason they didn't let Anne marry was Anne was actually the sensible one, because there was her father who was vain, her older sister who was also vain, her younger sister who is completely disinterested in her children, which quite rightly so, because they're boys. Why would she be interested in them, to be absolutely honest? It's perfectly normal behaviour for a Regency woman, because women couldn't actually work. They weren't allowed a public life. So your best hope was marrying well. Anne Elliot's family wanted to save her from making a disastrous marriage, because they were concerned that because she's the carer, she's the support, she's the rock, and because her father couldn't be controlled, because that was supposed to be Anne's job, they're having to downsize, and that's causing all sorts of issues. So you've got your inherited capital, your social economic capital, and your cultural capital. Cultural capital is, are you attending the right places and being seen in the right places as well, but also your education. Your social capital is, do you know enough people? And by know, I mean be able to nod your head to them in the street. You wouldn't necessarily have to know all their ins and outs, but you'd have to be aware of them. Women would have less access to this. That's why coming out into society was really important for a woman, because they were kept at home. They didn't go to school. Boys went to school and came home. Girls stayed at home, and if they were lucky, they learnt to do bookkeeping, which was basically adding and taking away money, and learning how to deal with pin money, which their husbands would give you an allowance, because at this time women couldn't have bank accounts. It's really important. Overall, I felt that they gave it a good go. It's an hour and 45 minutes long, but I felt that they lost the maturity of the novel. And yes, I thought Dakota Johnson gave Anne Elliot a really good try, but I felt that she made her too comic, and that thing about I've turned boats before was a sly nod to her 50 Shades of Grey stuff. But it was an interesting thing. Loved the landscape, loved the cinematography, loved the music. The source material I felt wasn't given. See, this is the thing. Jane Austen is reflecting and commenting on her own period, the Regency era, and saying where the faults are, and saying people shouldn't be snobbish, people with titles may not have enough money, they may be really, really stuck for cash themselves. So it is quite difficult for modern people to understand the social thing that's going on there, because you're only looking at the upper and the upper middle. And I fully get why they've done what they've done with it, because they've tried to put modern eyes onto to see the modern world through Jane Austen. And I believe it's possible to do that, but to be absolutely honest, sometimes you do actually have to stick with the source material, because it writes itself. The Emma Thompson Sense and Sensibility is great. The BBC version of Pride and Prejudice is a classic. The Keira Knightley version of Pride and Prejudice is a bit rushed towards the end, but okay. There have been many versions of Emma, and Emma always comes off well, even if it's a bad version. So there is that. Persuasion is a work that is difficult to actually remake. It's one of the most difficult ones to understand, because you've got a snobbery man that's so vain, and what you have to understand is everybody was into society, wanted to be the bee's knees, wanted to be seen with the right people. He's just taken it to the extreme because of his social situation, and he's got nothing else to do. And Jane Austen is poking fun at all these people that want to climb this ladder, that want to hobnob with some really boring titled people, because they sit there with these sort of extended relatives who've got titles, totally bored. And Anna's like, why on earth are we here? They're bored, we're bored. But her dad was completely thrilled, because it's like, yes, and we sat with them and we know them. And she's like, yes, but why? Trying to force something to be representative of modern society in the 21st century is ridiculous. This is Regency era stuff. It needs to be that way. Mansfield Park is another one that's quite complicated to actually make today, because it's all about morality. Because what was creeping in was this idea that you could marry somebody, and if you like somebody of the same class, you could play with them, and by play I mean have an affair, and it would be okay and nobody would mind. Once you'd had your selected children with your partner, you could go off and do whatever. And Mansfield Park is all about that, and the fact Jane Austen's got a beef with Gothic romance, that and slave owners, because in Mansfield Park, the reason why Mansfield Park is Mansfield Park and the owners of it are so wealthy is because they own slaves. And I think that that is something in Austen that people haven't picked up on, or don't realise, or don't understand, that the majority of the people that they're looking at will be involved, either investing in slavery, or some of their money will be caught up with it, because it's a big trade. At this particular point. And I think that I know that the Billy Piper version of Mansfield Park, the father has got a cane, and on its cane head, cane handle, it's actually got the face of a black person, to represent the fact that he does own slaves, because that's where his money comes from, the mahogany wood business, as it was called back in the day. And I think that's really important. So yeah, it's an hour and 45 minutes. It's kind of light. I'm not enjoying the whole Bridgerton thing, because Bridgerton is fantasy, not reality. Jane Austen is based on her observations during the time. It's almost like a first-hand account of, this is what life was like for women during this period from a certain social class. Yes, she may have tidied up the endings and made them all sort of happy, but this is what life was like. It's like having a view to the past. Bridgerton is not a view to the past, it's Mills and Boon gone mental. And I think that we've got to be careful. Historical romance is very different to what Jane Austen is, because Jane Austen is classic English literature. Very much like Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, and Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte, and The Tenant of Wildfell Hall by Anne Bronte, which is never filmed enough, because that's awesome. Those three novels are awesome. These are some of the major works in English literature, and there's a reason they're classics, because they changed what you could do with a novel. These were novels that showed people what their life was like, but also giving a little bit of sunshine. And I think that that's important. So overall, out of 5, I'm going to give it a 3. It's nice to look at, I suppose. And it's PG rated, which is what it should be if it's a Jane Austen. I can't really see them making a U. But there have been U's of Jane Austen, which I guess is nice. It's what you'd expect. But if you dig a little bit deeper in all of Jane Austen's novels, there's always something in the closet. Well, at least it's not Mr. Collins, is it? Mr. Collins in his closets. Anyway, hope you've enjoyed this review. Please like, comment and subscribe, and don't forget to click the notification bell.